You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm in conversation with Ross Davies, MD at Nottingham-based conversion-focused design agency Strafe Creative. We discuss what are the different approaches to conversion rate optimization for B2B, B2C and startup businesses, and whether all businesses can gain value from CRO. We also talk a little about how Ross, with the help of nearly 100 volunteers, gave something back to the community during the COVID crisis over the last 2 years. Ross, you've been at Strafe Creative for nearly 11 years and worked with a diverse range of companies and industries during that time. Have you become specialist in any particular industry type?
So before I set Strafe up, I actually worked in the games industry, and I did a little bit of area in the kind of mobile gaming. And I think what's kind of naturally happened over time is the friends and contacts that we've made there have kind of moved in positions of power, or whatever you want to call it. And we've been very lucky that we've been able to get quite involved in kind of mobile gaming. And what I mean by that is, you've got your micro purchases, your micro transactions that you're making. And actually, I think gaming and mobile gaming is still a space that probably isn't quite as well thought through as some of the e-commerce. So we're taking basically payments that are done through gaming and I guess applying a more kind of strategic approach to that. So that's definitely one area that we do quite a lot of work. And then the other one that we probably do a lot of in is kind of SaaS, so software as a service. So, Microsoft Office nowadays, you don't pay for that on as a disc like you used to. I don't think anyone even uses discs anymore.
You're showing your age now, Ross.
I know, right? Oh no, I've let it slip. But now, obviously, you're paying a monthly fee for those. So the website that you would go to needs to do a good job of convincing someone to sign up for some form of monthly service. So we do quite a lot in that space as well. And they're probably the two areas that we get involved in. I'm always conscious when we say specialisms that I then don't want to spout off 100 other things that we do, because obviously we do get involved in B2B businesses. We do get involved in e-commerce. But I would probably say that a broad kind of spectrum of our work really kind of comes down to the SaaS and gaming work.
So would you say that's more, or both of those channels are kind of subscription based?
Yeah, definitely. So especially with the SaaS one, it's not just about the initial onboarding. Well, there's a couple of steps with that. So obviously you've got to convince the potential user that they want to try this software out. And that in itself obviously needs to be really well thought out from a conversion perspective and making sure we get across the main benefits and why they should do it. But then we also have to consider the actual onboarding journey and how do we get them, once they've committed to actually trialing it, to actually, I guess, for them to find the actual use out of it. So the onboarding is really, really key. And then once they're onboarded, we also have to consider any additional upsells. How do we keep them happy? How do we keep them coming back? How do we make the platform sticky? So there's a lot of elements that go into it. And that's why it's kind of one of our favorite items to kind of work on, because there's all these different avenues and stages in that funnel that we have to consider.
But I think that must be, I suppose, like an ongoing relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, a normal personal relationship where you have to keep constantly looking at your engagement process and whether people are logging on, whether they're not logging on. How can you encourage them to log on if they haven't logged on? Would that be right?
Yeah, it's a real group effort because we're only really focusing from a design perspective, and we obviously want to see those stats, but normally there's either a third-party marketing company or they might have a marketing firm, kind of armed to their business already. So a lot of it comes down to us working with them to make sure that we've got the data to figure out what needs to be changed. We obviously have to be very careful that we don't want to just design something because we think it's the right thing. We need to kind of base it on what the data is telling us.
If I was trying to dig a little deeper, I would say that the gaming is probably B2C
Hmm.
and the subscription-based stuff is B2B. Would I be right in that?
You can get a little bit of B2C, but yeah, but it generally falls into a B2B for some of the SaaS work. So there is a fairly decent split there. Obviously, if you had gaming that was related to B2B, there's probably something we're doing wrong.
Yes.
But it's very much B2C with those sort of stages. And yeah, your SaaS can be, there are going to be monthly softwares where they'll be straight to consumer and you're going to want those. And then they normally as well have an enterprise option that might still be used for business as well. And obviously there's loads of softwares that are purely just targeted at businesses as well.
So what would you say is the balance between B2B and B2C, and what would your approach be, and how different would your approach be looking at both of those industries or types?
Yeah, so we're about a 60-40 split, and 60% kind of more towards B2B,
Yeah.
in all honesty. And that's probably because although we do a lot in the B2C space, especially with kind of these gaming and some of these SaaS projects, they're really large projects, but we only have a few of them, whereas we've got kind of a lot of the B2B. And then I think the difference ends up kind of coming a little bit down to what the user's expectation of it is. So for me, the kind of difference is if we focus on B2C, the likelihood is that this purchase is a little bit more transactional. The
Mhm.
likelihood is that they can come on, read a little bit of information about it, and be tempted to try it there and then. There's nothing to really hold someone back from either buying it or trialing it for a certain amount of time, or having a month's go at it.
And it's a
So
single decision maker, isn't it?
yeah, 100%. It's a single decision maker. I'm going to make that decision. The cost of B2C stuff isn't normally hugely expensive, so
Mhm.
it's an easier decision, and we can generally sell that service in a far more transactional manner. Whereas B2B, as you've kind of mentioned, you've probably got multiple decision makers. They might already be using a piece of software that does something similar. It's not just a case of using it, it's the potential moving across to it from something else. Do they need to get buy-in from lots of other people? Do they have the budget assigned to it? Maybe it's slightly out of budget, because obviously B2B softwares can just generally be more expensive. So, there's going to be more value given. So the idea is there's going to be a cost to that. So we also generally find with B2C, it's very transactional, whereas with a B2B, we might need to consider at what stage they are in the buying journey. So if they're only at information gathering stage, we need to make sure that they find that information and feel value in it. And do we try and get something from them, such as an email address in exchange for something of value that we can give them and then slowly sell to them? You might have someone who's a little bit further down the line who might want to trial it but not fully commit to it yet, and they might want to attend a webinar or something along those lines. And then you've obviously got people who are going to trial it, and then you've also got the people who will trial it purely on behalf of their boss before their boss needs to try it. So there's a lot more kind of buying behaviors that we have to cater for with a B2B business.
But that's kind of running 4 or 5 different customer journeys, isn't it? Because
Yes.
you need to identify who that person is at the end of the connection to be able to sell them the right sort of things. And messaging is very important to that. How do you manage to cope with that?
I think one of the first places that we just start is going right back to the very beginning before we do any actual kind of design work. And it's very easy to jump in and start making something look beautiful.
Hmm.
So instead, really, it's down to the research stages that we're going to do to start with. And one of the key things is probably like the interviews that we always try to do. So not only do we want to interview the directors to get an understanding of what they want, but we probably want to interview some of the sales staff that are constantly being kind of speaking directly to the consumer. But actually, if we can speak to some of the top clients, that's super beneficial to have an understanding of what they like about it, what they don't, what stops them from committing further. And then even just simple things. If someone doesn't buy, you can have little pop-up questions like a Qualaroo kind of messaging account where it pops up to say, hey, what stopped you from buying today? So just trying to get a really rounded understanding of the reasons people do buy, but also the reasons people don't buy is really key. And that also ties in with something that I guess that we like to think of I guess it's our secret sauce, but not so secret because I'm going to just tell it you. Um, but it's all about kind of the additional research that we end up doing. So it's looking on forums, it's looking at the competitors, it's just doing Google searches around that industry that we might be working in to try get really good understandings of it. Products are a lot easier to research because we can literally type in the name of the product type and ask
Mm-hmm.
and like write the word review. And
Yep.
what's super beneficial at the top of all of those reviews is they pretty much always write the pros and the cons.
Yep.
So it's really easy to kind of find some of that information. Whereas obviously, if it's more of a business, we have to more consider what people are saying about the industry. And that's normally a better way of doing it. But even just reading reviews and looking on forums is a really overlooked area, is a really good one that gives us loads of rounded experience. I'm aware that I'm giving you the world's longest answer to to your question, but one of the things on that is once we have those understandings, that allows us to figure out, okay, what can we visually get across through the site, and where do we want to push a user? So if they're only at this stage, let's try and push them to this area of the website so we can convince them of these things. And really signposting the way a user should use the site is really key.
But that's dependent upon understanding who that user is, surely.
Yeah,
So
100%.
how do you get that information in the first instance when somebody who has never been to the site before comes along and says, I'm looking at some pages? How can you determine who that individual is and what their needs are?
So some of it will come down to, I guess, where they've come from. So we can obviously take into account if they've come from a marketing aspect that we've already kind of labeling them in a certain way. So, if we've got some marketing out to a very particular persona and they've interacted in it from that point of view, we can obviously monitor that. We do quite a lot of bit of reverse IP lookups to get an indication of where they are and if they're business based or home based, and that's going to be really useful. And that also tells us obviously how often they're coming to the site, if they're coming back, if they're sharing that around.
Been a bit challenging over COVID times, that though.
Yeah, just a little bit. To be honest, that's kind of why I said it with almost with a pinch of salt, which feels like so much harder to do that now.
Yes.
But a lot of it will come down to just how we signpost people around. So, for example, we're working with a company at the moment where they have lots of different styles of users that come on. And one of the easiest things that we identified was with their old site, it was really unclear what they offered.
Yeah.
Because they offered so many different things, so people didn't know where to start. So we ended up just creating like a start here section. Sounds really obvious, right? But loads of people overlook it. So people can go to that start here. They can be shown to say, okay, if you're at this stage, do this. If you're at this stage, go here. So just really making it super obvious from a signposting point of view is normally the key way. The second option that we normally try to do is then capture their information, and we'll offer them a few different ways of interacting with that. And based on what they decide to download or interact with, gives us a better understanding of what that person is, I guess the persona of that person.
So essentially, that's your conversion rate optimization that's doing that. A little bit of site design in the first instance and UX, I'm sure, but being able to push people down a particular area of the business. Is conversion rate optimization different for B2B and B2C?
Yeah, I think the difference for us, and it might be a little bit down to our clientele in all honesty, but we generally find B2B websites just have less traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So the slight issue that we've had in the past is if you're trying to do your traditional split testing, that you end up with your different variations, but you end up splitting your traffic so small that you don't actually get a decent result. Yeah. So then you end up having to run them for too long. So what we end up doing more with B2B is running what is called a Bayesian approach, and the Bayesian approach is an idea that you will theorize what you think is going to be the best possible outcome or what you think is the problem, and then you design based on that. And because you're using a Bayesian approach, you're hugely reducing the number of variations. So rather than maybe 6 to 10 variations, you're only doing like 2. And then obviously you've got the control or the original. I'm sorry, I'm aware that I'm using some technical language.
That's okay.
So running it in that fashion, we generally find we get really good results with that, and it also allows us to continuously be improving the site. Whereas if we do traditional split testing with lower traffic sites, then we end up having to run them for so long that you don't necessarily get the value as quickly as you want. And touch wood, that generally always works really well. That's obviously one of the huge benefits of split testing, right? You can mess up 9 of them and you do one well, and you just go ta-da. So that's probably the slight difference. Whereas with B2C, our clients have much higher figure numbers, so we can we can do the more traditional split testing. Occasionally we will run with maybe something that's this kind of theorized idea about improving something, and I do think that's quite key. But most of the time you can do a little bit more of a traditional split testing process with higher traffic. So that's kind of how we split them out anyway.
Have you tried using conversational pop-ups or surveys, online surveys, as one might say, with 2 or 3 buttons and things like that? And if so, does that work?
Yeah, so every project always starts with that, and that's the simple one that we always do over and over again. Every single project that we ever take on, we always include a little pop-up that basically just says what stopped you buying today, and that comes up as they're about to leave the page. And that's a really useful thing for us to find out what the potential objections are. So that is one that we do start with. In all honesty, there's a huge trend at the moment with conversational kind of commerce and getting kind of your chats more involved in these bots. And in all honesty, that's not a huge area that we're particularly experienced in yet. It's something that we're kind of trialing. But at the moment, yeah, every single project that we do always starts with that same question. And that gives us something really concrete to kind of start with.
Because one of the challenges that we all face now is, in the not too distant future, third-party cookies are going to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we need to be able to get more content, zero-party cookies, if you like, from the people that are on our site. So the conversational pop-ups and the questionnaires is probably a way that's going to become more prolific in the next 6 to 12 months. Purely and simply, we need to find out more information about who's on our site and being able to sell to them more effectively, because people have a short attention span and therefore they want to get the best outcome. And I think conversational pop-ups are going to be much more prevalent. And I think that from the perspective of do they work or not, time will tell. I'm sure the indications so far are that they're good. But one of the things I've noticed is from your LinkedIn profile, you seem to be doing a lot more with startups, particularly technology startups. Is that a conscious effort from your part?
Yes, it is. I'd probably say, because we end up with these quite exciting projects that we get involved in. There's normally a little bit of funding at the front, and I think one of the huge benefits of this is that they're very passionate. They're excited to kind of allow us to kind of lead on what we think is going to work best, and then we get to kind of go from there. They normally as well have developers on board, so we generally find a startup probably has either someone who's an owner or one very high up that probably has some dev experience, which allows us to basically work with them quite rapidly. We can start producing kind of designs and they can be kind of making them, and we get to kind of work as more of a tandem team. And one of the things you probably saw on our LinkedIn is that we're creating this list of like VCs and investors as well, with the idea that they'll know that if it's coming through from Strafe, that it's already got a decent amount of thought process into everything. And, depending on the stage where that is. So we have some that come to us and all we end up creating for them is an MVP and a pitch deck. Whereas a lot of people will also come to us because they've already done the MVP themselves internally. They've got the funding that they needed. And then they realize that, okay, it's time for us to like redesign and rebuild properly. And that's where we'll get involved. So it's kind of a fluctuation between those two, but it is a conscious effort just because it's really fun work. We get to sink our teeth into it. And going back to one of my very first kind of points that I made is you're not just considering the main website, you've got to consider the onboarding journey. Once they're in there, we need to make it really intuitive to use. And then we need to keep them coming back and making the product sticky. So there's lots of kind of problems which are like really fun to try and solve.
And do you get in what I would describe as the whole business stroke digital optimization that's actually helping them to be able to understand what digital can do? Or do you think they come to you ready formed?
So I guess we don't get as involved in that stage. We do have a couple of partners that will probably get a little bit more involved from that point of view of making them digitally ready. We do give advice, but it's not an expertise that we really have. Same with just even kind of from a marketing perspective, that we try to just focus on the design elements and the build elements. And if someone's considering SEO or pay-per-click or how they're marketing or anything along those lines, we normally would work with a third-party company. So we just focus on the bit we're good at, really.
I agree wholeheartedly with your statement about companies being passionate in early stage startups and things like that. And there's a lot of energy and a lot of passion inside of that. But often that comes with small budgets as well. Does that represent a problem?
But budgets are always going to have a problem because there's only so much that we can do for a budget, right? Like, we've all
Yeah.
got we're running businesses at the end of the day, so we do have to consider that. So one of the things that we'll always try to do is, we'll try to be honest with what their budget is and what we can do for that money, and if we think that's suitable for them. And they're normally the best ways of working things. We do run a separate company called Strafe Ventures, and Strafe Ventures allows us to basically join a business through sweat equity. So we will give some of our design and build time in exchange for a percentage of the business, but we're very, very tight on offering that and how often we do that. So we only try to take on 1 or 2 of those a year, and that's just because we see huge value in the project and want to get involved and think we could really help. So yeah, they're the two general ways that we'll try and work it. So it's either what can we do for that budget and reduce it down, or yeah, we can offer Strafe Ventures as an option as well.
So many of those startups will come with preconceived ideas that they have to do PPC, they have to do retargeting, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And often CRO is not within that thought process in the early stages. So how do you convince an early stage company to invest in CRO?
Good question. So we try and base it on the stats that they kind of come to us with. So we'll ask to see their conversion rate, their cost per acquisition, and try get an understanding of what they have. And in all honesty, what happens a lot of the time is they're not necessarily coming to us for what they've realized is CRO. They're just coming to us because they're aware that the website isn't converting as highly as they want it to be. So they've heard that Strafe is very good at creating high converting sites. So then they come to us for that. So it's not until we start to have those discussions with them that we can kind of say, well, we can go down the whole new website point of view, but you might not need to. Actually, the bones of what you've got here is pretty good. And, there might be some elements that we can just learn from the site that would really allow us to tweak it and change it. So, from our point of view, it might be talking ourselves out of some budget, but it's better for the client, right? And then if we build that relationship with them, they're going to want to stay with us long term and we can help grow them. And if we do that, yes, we might not get the brand new site, but we might be able to get involved in some of the other aspects of it. So I think we're probably quite lucky, and John, it'd be interesting to hear how you sometimes approach this. But people rarely come to us straight CRO. It's normally because they need something. They're almost just like, well, we need a new website, and it's not until we kind of go, well, hold up a minute, that we can kind of have that conversation with them. I don't know if you kind of view that in a different light.
So I think from companies that are mature, CRO is an evolution. And people come in and say, okay, yes, I'm doing all these sorts of things, and now I want to improve the conversion rate of my website.
Mm-hmm.
And so CRO falls naturally into their thought process, once stimulated anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think from new business companies, you're right, they have to have a more holistic approach with regard to being able to say, we need to improve your brand and your ability to be able to sell from your website. It's not just brochureware, it's something that's far more important than that. So I think it is much more challenging to think about CRO specifically in that early stage, and that's generally why our clients are more kind of akin to those that are a little bit more mature. But one of the things that I think is an area where I think we could discuss is there a particular time in a company's evolution where CRO tends to resonate well?
Yeah, I guess we can split this down slightly into B2B and B2C again, I would imagine. We generally find that, if it's a B2C business that they're selling directly in, it's probably as the company starts to expand and grow and they bring in additional staff members that have some expertise in that place, and not that they necessarily know how to do it, but they've just matured. They've probably worked at places before that already had it in. So we worked with an e-commerce company for quite a long time from a startup point of view and help them grow. And we'd mentioned kind of CRO work to them in the past. And it had always been one of those, further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas as soon as they've brought in a staff member that sees the huge value in it, they can push for it, get their budgets assigned to it. And then we've always kind of found that's been the case. Now, that monetary value is impossible to say, because some people might view that as, we've done $1 million now, so we can start investing in it. Whereas some people might only get to a couple of 100,000 and feel like they see the value in it. For me, if the conversion rate's less than 1%, then that's probably something we should be working on. because anything, we can, if it's that low, we should be able to get that much higher. So that for me is a nice easy one for a listener if they're kind of looking at where their site is at the moment. Now the next part of that for us comes down to, I guess, the value that we can bring them. If the profit margin on each product that they're selling is quite small, and we end up working out that they might need to spend a couple of £1,000 with us, but we don't think the increase in conversion rate is going to cover that cost, then we'll always be very honest with them and just basically explain to say, considering here that they're selling a £10 item and the profit margin on it is £1 or 10-20% or something, that they're going to have to sell a lot to cover our cost. If they just don't have that traffic level, then that makes it harder. So each time we work on this, we're almost, I don't know how you approach this, John, but we always approach this as trying to talk the client out of using us.
Interesting concept.
It's much better I know, right? But it's much better to be like, we're going to have to hit this number to get there, and we're going to have to do these things. And is that realistic? And is it not? And how long do we think it's going to take us to get there? And if the client's on board with that, then that's fine. So yeah, it's almost our job to kind of explain why they wouldn't want to go with it, to make sure that they're on board and they do see the value in it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important to be totally honest with your clients and see if there is going to be real value in delivering what they're trying to deliver. And that isn't always monetary, I have to say. Some of the times people are looking for greater engagement rather than just a true conversion in the kind of pounds, shillings and pence. That's showing my age again.
Pence?
Yeah, I know. Long time ago. But it's being able to prove to a client that they're getting value, and that value is the value that they see out of it rather than what we see out of it as suppliers. Because I think it's an important way of being able to say to the client, you might see value in doing something which is just taking a person from place A to place B on your website. You may see value in them converting by downloading a white paper that they've never had before. It may be that they're actually adding stuff to their basket that they never did before. It doesn't always have to be monetarily. But one of the challenges, I think, is most companies do look for a return on investment. And that return on investment must be challenging in startups particularly to show that there is a return on investment, CRO individually rather than CRO as a built-in package. But I think there are times inside of many organizations where CRO is less important. And I think CRO today has gained, fortunately, a good press, and people are moving to CRO much more than they did before, because obviously the demise of the high street, COVID, etc., is meaning that people want to get more and more out of their website. But do you believe that there are companies out there that will not get any value from CRO?
We believe that basically all sites or anything that we're creating for someone should be done with a set purpose. We're not an agency that you would come to for you just to create something that looks beautiful. Obviously, we do want it to look beautiful, but we want it to perform an action, whether that is to get a lead or a download or something from them. So for us, every client can benefit from it. I think having something purpose-driven with an end goal that you can track and then you can tweak to improve is critical to success of any business. So for someone who doesn't necessarily value that, they're probably not a company that we would normally or would want to work with us, because we're so focused on those sort of elements. So for me, it's a quite simple just yes. Like I think all companies should be doing it and see value in it in some way. As you've mentioned, it might not be a case that they need to make a transactional thing, but if you're giving away something for free, we can definitely improve, how often that is downloaded, even if it is for free, even if you're just trying to give value to people. Even simple things like, I was trying to book my daughter's birthday party. She's just about to turn 4. And most of the sites that I came across for that, all they do is show information. They're like, here's an image, here's some information about it. Like, none of them make any attempt for me to actually book anything. They make it as hard as physically possible for me to do anything, to book anything.
Some good potential work there for you.
I know, right? And this is kind of this is when people say like, oh, we do, we just want them to make the decision themselves. And personally, it's always much better for us to have a really set idea about what we want to achieve from the site and then design the site based to achieve that in the first place.
It seems that outside of your normal marketing activities with Strafe Creative, you believe in giving back to the community. And at the beginning of COVID, you created Open Kitchens, which is, well, actually, I'll let you explain. What's that all about?
This was, I guess, a joint project between, well, it started out as Adam and Alex and myself and Patrick, my business partner. And it grew to about 100 people, actually. Briefly, we were all volunteering. But the idea of Open Kitchens is at the start of COVID, obviously all the restaurants closed, the food chain was pretty destroyed. And there was a lot of vulnerable people who relied on charities and going in and getting off, their free meals, their hot meals, or even just vulnerable people that were having carers going in that no longer had them coming in. And Adam works in the kind of restaurant industry and basically realized what was happening. And what we ended up creating was Open Kitchens, which was a platform where restaurants could commit to using their staff to create meals for free. So they were all furloughed. They weren't technically working. They were volunteering, but the restaurants were giving up their kitchens for free to be able to cook in. We then managed to contact lots of food distribution companies where all that food was going to go to waste, and then we could get our hands on that. The platform that we created allowed each individual restaurant that signed up to take advantage of its marketing lists to try generate donations. And then we also approached lots of CSR departments in companies to try get large donations from them as well. And we ended up getting people like Hilton Hotels on board, Chelsea Football Club, Superdry donated, Capital One, as well as hundreds of individual restaurants that all helped. And actually, I'd found out the other day, so on our current Open Kitchens website, it says that we raised about £500,000.
Wow.
And we delivered 255,000 meals. I actually met up with Adam for a beer last week, and he was saying that actually that number is completely wrong now because it's continued to grow. That we've delivered around 500,000 meals now.
So that's growing pretty spectacularly.
Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing, and just being able to kind of like get those meals out to those people. And we've ended up linking with charities. So we ended up building a little bit of tech that allowed charities to basically say, hey, we need food. And then once the food was made, it got pushed on there and they could choose which meals they claimed. And obviously we were running a very much a system of, you can't just claim all of them.
Yes.
I think we've got about 11,000 charities on there now. But most of that is done via 2 or 3 major charities that then deal with the other charities on our behalf. So real kind of team effort. It was amazing to be involved in. It ended up becoming its own little individual bit of tech that we ended up building and designing. And it was great. It was definitely one of the biggest things that, from our point of view, that kind of came out of, I guess, a really good thing that did come out of COVID was to see the number of people who wanted to help and donate. And, we had about 100 volunteers and people giving up their vans. I think we had Vanarama gave us 25 vans for about 2 months.
Wow.
So that we could just use them. And it was amazing just to see kind of, humans looking after humans, right?
Yeah.
People looking after people. It was incredible.
So that's a really fantastic thing to do, especially in times when they've been hard. But you've obviously invested a lot of man hours in the technology build and things like that. Is there a way that you could utilize that or monetize that in other areas of your business?
Yeah, so the idea that we're actually looking at the moment is it's not to turn it into like something that's going to make money. It's a non-for-profit, the tech, but the idea is just to cover its kind of overheads via license fees, so that other people can make use of it. We can then have people more dedicated to it to continue to grow it out. But it's got a large amount to it now. So it's got an inventory system in, because one of the things that we were finding is that we were getting all this food in and trying to run it just in spreadsheets was really hard because it was too hard to see what was going on. So we ended up creating an inventory system. But one of the big things with charities is they have to know the meals that they're giving are, I guess, full of vitamins, full of certain amounts of protein. They can't just give someone a pack of crisps, for example. So we realized that, well, none of the inventory kind of systems have that at the moment. So we need to build that in. And then we had to consider that, okay, well, if we're going to deliver meals straight away, how do the drivers know which boxes they picked up? So it ended up becoming this almost kind of little side project that ended up becoming a lot bigger than it was meant to be. But it was really good learnings for us. It was really nice to be able to kind of help out with that. And the hope is that that technology can continue to be used, and just for a very nominal kind of license fee that's going to allow us to keep people on it full time.
Well, it's certainly a great effort from Strafe and all the others that are there to make it work. And I'm sure it added more workload to your already busy workload running a very busy creative agency. But from my perspective, we're running short of time. But I'd just like to say, it seems like that Strafe Creative is going from strength to strength. It's got great technology. It's got some wonderful corporate sense of responsibility out there as well. And I wish you the best for the future. At some point in time, we might pick up a podcast again to see how life is getting on up in Nottingham and how much you've diversified away from the Midlands region. But for now, Ross, thanks very much for your time, and it would be great to catch up with you later.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, John. It's been an absolute pleasure, and anything I can do to help, just let me know. Thanks again.